Well, despite it being the middle of winter, we are still predominantly eating food that we have managed to grow ourselves. So today I thought I would share with you some of the strategies that I have employed to make sure that we have enough food to get us right through the winter and heading back into the summer. Some of the things I'll show you today are on our new property, and it is quite large. It is 43 acres, and my vegetable garden here is probably around 200 square meters, which is I think about 2,000 square feet. And we have got a large tunnel house here as well, which is 100 square meters, which again around 1,000 square feet. However, I didn't always have these things, and I have managed to use the same strategies to grow all of our family's vegetables. We are still trying to sell our previous property. It's 10 acres, and so we have had lots of different animals and stuff on there, and that's still where our chickens are. We are starting to transfer ourselves over to the new place, even though we haven't sold the previous one, because we need to get this one set up, because we are actually having a baby just before Christmas. So my video production has been a little slack, I'm sorry, just between winter things, so my garden's not really producing much to show you, and feeling a little bit rotten, to be quite frank. We haven't always grown all our own vegetables. In fact, it's only been over the last sort of 3 or 4 years that I've actually managed to get to that level. In that time, I didn't increase the size of my garden. I just changed the strategies I was using on growing stuff and rotating them and making sure I had enough to succession sow, as opposed to just planting them once and leaving them be. We don't have a particularly small family. We've got 4 kids, and so we do eat quite a lot of vegetables, and I have planted this place up in a lot of fruit trees, and I'm really hoping that they start producing fruit really soon. So my very first strategy is to make sure you are growing things that you're actually going to eat. There are quite a few vegetables that my kids just refuse, and actually there's quite a few that I don't like either, Brussels sprouts being one of them. So we just don't grow those things. What we do grow is a lot of things that we can either preserve or keep really well, or can grow through the winter. So we do grow a lot of peas. We do grow a lot of carrots. I did 3 massive garden beds of carrots, and now they're all crammed in my refrigerator. We grow lots of potatoes. Unfortunately, we can't really grow sweet potatoes here, much to my husband's sadness. I am going to try them in some containers in the tunnel house this year though. We grow quite a lot of New Zealand yam, also known as oca. Unfortunately, it doesn't preserve or store quite as well as a sweet potato does, but I actually prefer them. I really like them. We try and grow all our own onions and garlic. This year my onions didn't do quite so well, but we are still eating some of the ones that didn't mature enough and still had really thick necks and tried to grow to seed. Those ones I have cut them up and put them straight in the freezer, so we're using them frozen. So I actually haven't bought onions yet so far this year. I have got my next season's worth of garlic already in the ground, and I have got this whole garden bed full of garlic. Unfortunately, the blackbirds have got in there multiple times. The blackbirds are doing my head in, and I keep digging them out. So I need to try and keep them well and truly covered. But between the wind pulling the covers off and the birds being sneaky and getting in there, I've had to replant this end of it probably about 4 times. We grow a lot of green beans, which I tend to just freeze. My kids don't really like them canned. And then over the winter, my kids' favourite vegetable is broccoli, so we grow a lot of that. My second strategy that we have taken to using is to make sure that the soil is as well fed and as rich as possible. That will make the biggest tubers and root vegetables, the bigger ones, store much longer and much better than the small piddly ones. So the little tiny ones we tend to eat much faster. This includes yams, potatoes and carrots particularly, and the larger ones we try to store for later. And of course, the more rich your soil is, the better your other plants are going to grow as well, so the more food you're going to get out of the ground. For us, this means we put compost on the ground every year pretty much, and the upside to that is top dressing with compost acts as a bit of a mulch. Oh, the sun's come out. It acts as a bit of a mulch, reducing your water requirements, and on top of that it slowly breaks down and feeds the plants while keeping the weeds largely at bay, and any weeds that do grow are really easy to pluck out. Strategy number 3 is definitely utilising the space we have. Now for us, we have this massive tunnel house, which is amazing for us, gives us a lot of growing space that we're able to actually use over the winter. So for us, that means that while the tomatoes and peppers are still in here, I'm sneaking seeds in between those tomato plants of all the brassicas and the lettuces and spinach, and this year we've also grown carrots and peas in the tunnel house over the winter, and I've snuck most of those seeds in the ground while the tomatoes and peppers were still growing. And then around April-ish, as the seasons start changing, and usually it's about when we get our first frost outside, that's when I start removing the tomato plants and the peppers that aren't doing so well. And the ones that are our favourites, we tend to leave in as long as we possibly can. So actually, it's the middle of July here. And I've only just removed the last of our tomato plants out of here last week. They were still producing, but they just eventually got to the point where the cold got to them and we had to pull them out. However, I do still have some jalapeno plants that are producing, and I picked a whole big massive handful of jalapenos yesterday for a Mexican feast we had. Another thing we have done to make use of the warmer space in here is growing fruit plants that we can't grow outside. For us, that is grapes. For the most part, figs don't ripen outside yet. I have nearly got some ripe figs off my plant over at the other house. And citrus. I've got them all in containers in the tunnel house as well, making the most of the space we have. Part of this also is wherever there are gaps in the garden to always have some kind of seedling on the way ready to sneak in. So over the summer that tends to be lots of leafy greens, something that you can just have sitting in their plug trays ready as soon as there's some gaps or a crop failure or anything, just sneak those in there. Bush beans are another great option for this because they take about 60 days and you can get a harvest from them. In previous years I would have left my tunnel house just empty over the winter. But because we are using it to grow so many brassicas, we're eating fresh coleslaw and fresh peas in the middle of winter. So good. And plenty of fresh broccoli all out of the tunnel house all through the winter. So we're not even dipping into frozen stuff, we're getting it fresh out the garden. Now tip number 4, I think I'm up to number 4, we'll go with number 4. I'm pretty sure it is using succession sowing. And so the upside to this is you are getting multiple crops out of your ground over the course of a season. And this can greatly extend the amount of food that we were getting out of our garden. So when I pull out my garlic, I stick in some bush beans, and when the bush beans come out, it's almost time for the garlic to go back in. And it means that the ground's not laying fallow, not being left empty, and it means that there's always a living root in the soil, feeding those soil microbes and getting them up and running. Tip number 5 is to grow as many things as you can from seed. Seed is so much cheaper, especially if you save it yourself, than buying starts or plants. And honestly, growing things from seed is not as tricky as it may seem. Part of the trick though is to make sure that you're sowing things at the right time. And I have actually written a book all about gardening on the homestead and how to make sure that you're making best use of your garden during the whole year. So I'll put a link to it up here and down here so that you can have a look and check it out for yourself. For us, that means I have started my tomatoes already, and about 3 weeks ago I started my onion seeds as well. I love growing my onions from seed, and I always start them just after the winter solstice, and it means that they will bulb up after the summer solstice, which is how the long day onions function. If you grow short day onions because you're somewhere hot, you tend to grow them over the winter, and it's basically in reverse. You want to plant them after the longest day and harvest them after the shortest day, which is the opposite of what I need to do with my long day onions. Number 6 that I do is I preserve as much as I can. There's a bit of a combination of preserving that we do. I do a bit of dehydrating, I do a fair amount of canning. We also use the freezers a lot. My family don't really like the taste of canned vegetables, so we tend to freeze most of our vegetables if we're doing that. One day I would love to have a freeze dryer, but at the moment, 1, it's not in the budget, and 2, we are moving to somewhere that's running off 1 solar panel, so that's just not going to be happening until we get everything else set up here. We make do with some dark cupboards in the pantry, and we stick some stuff in the fridge, and we just try and eat it as best we can before it goes yuck. And step number 7 is to establish some perennial food production of some description in the garden. So for us, that is our food forest that we've got out here. And for us, perennial production is predominantly our big fruit trees, our berries, and our nuts. And we have some tiny little hazelnut trees that I've put in, a small walnut tree. I have great plans for a lot more nut trees, but it's always a bit of a process between either growing them from seed and waiting for them, but getting them for almost free, or spending $50 to $60 a tree. So for us, it's kind of that balance between the two, and I'm doing a mixture of both. And step number 8 is to grow your own protein. Now for us, self-sufficiency isn't just about the garden. We eat eggs from our chickens all year round, and the way we do it is twofold. Step 1, in the springtime when the chickens are laying a lot, we make sure we preserve some. My favorite way of doing it is actually to dehydrate them. If I had a freeze dryer, I would definitely do that. And the other option is to use some lime and to lime them. And there's heaps of videos out there on instructions on how to do that. I don't have one myself as of yet. But both of these give us an option for using eggs through the year. Another option is also to freeze them. You can put them into a little Ziploc bag, throw them into the freezer and pull them back out. I never use them whole like that though, always scrambled, and either into a quiche, make them scrambled, make a what's it called where you fold it? An omelette, or for baking. They work perfectly fine for all of those things, but the texture's a little funny if you just try and poach them like that. And the other thing we do is every year we get a few more laying chickens, and we always get the spring ones that will start laying about 6 months later at the beginning of winter, and so they lay all winter long and they don't actually go into their molt until the following autumn or fall, which is actually perfect for us. Obviously the egg production does drop off as the light hours decrease, but we are getting at least some egg production right through the winter. And one thing I'm really looking forward to once the grass gets growing and we've got some fences here is to get a house cow, and that is one of the things that we are not at all self-sufficient in, is all of our dairy products. And you could imagine with 4 kids and another one on the way, we actually consume a phenomenal amount of dairy. We don't drink milk, it doesn't tend to agree with our guts very well. However, previously we have had access to raw milk and we have all tolerated it really well. But we do go through a lot of cheese, a lot of butter, a lot of cream and a lot of yogurt. So when we have a cow, that is the plan, is to make all those things, and that'll be a huge amount that we don't have to buy from the supermarket anymore. Are we completely self-sufficient? No, we do still buy quite a few things from the supermarket, including all of our grain products, which we don't eat a huge amount of, but children still really enjoy it, and heck, who doesn't love a good piece of fresh sourdough? So all of our flour, our sugar, those sorts of things, we do all still buy those, as well as some convenience foods, because at the end of the day, lunch boxes take a lot more brain power than I have often. And the other thing we grow for ourselves is meat, and for us the best time to process an animal is obviously when the weather is a bit cooler. So heading into autumn/fall and heading into early winter, that is the best time for us to start putting some of the spring animals into the freezer from the year before. We have tried all sorts of things, chickens and rabbits. They were great. They were a really fantastic entry option to learning to process and butcher stuff yourself, but we were finding the amount of commercial food we had to feed those animals to get them to a decent weight in a decent amount of time just made the chicken and the rabbit far too expensive for us. Unfortunately, here in New Zealand, for some reason, grain products are really expensive, and it just wasn't worth it for us. So what we have decided to do is predominantly grow things that eat grass. Our chickens predominantly live off scraps, and so we get lots of eggs from them for free, but it's not the best way of raising meat animals. And if you want to find out more about how we raise our chickens without using grain, you can check it out up here. I will see you in the next one.